Well, welcome everybody. This is our live youth work conversation on Tuesday afternoon. If you're joining us either now or at a later date, you are really welcome. Let's just go around the room and just say hi and explain who we are. Ben, who are you? What are you doing here?
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm the youth advisor for Blackburn Diocese. You may have seen my face on a few of these already. Yeah, hi.
Dawn, who are you?
I'm Dawn. I'm one of the, Graham always tells me off. I'm one of the children, family and youth advisors for the Leeds Diocese. And I've also been on these a few times.
Yeah. And finally, Graham.
Hi, I'm finally Graham. I am part of the team in Leeds Diocese. I'm having to duck slightly because I'm actually wearing a Diocese of Manchester hoodie today, just to keep people confused. Greater northwest, northeast. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm Andy Harris. I work in Durham Diocese and I oversee the 11 to 18s as leader of youth mission and ministry. So that's just briefly who we are. What we are looking at this afternoon is the question about when is it not okay to share your faith, and other versions, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. We'll start in one place, have a conversation. If you are watching this live, then please put in questions and comments into the chat, and then we'll try and build those into our conversation as we go along. So should we pray to start with? Graham, you're going to pray because you got your hand up.
I know. I was going to say, if you're not watching this live, you're still welcome to put questions in the chat, and we'll pick those up over the course of the week. But yeah, I'm also happy to pray. So
I thought you volunteered then.
I volunteered to put my hand up. That's So, Father, as we meet this week to talk about sharing your good news, help us to have a great conversation, to share openly and honestly, and to be really discerning in terms of our practice from beyond today, to think about where the opportunities are, that we don't ignore them, we don't walk past them, but we're also filled with your love for people so much that we also know when to be and when to speak, and when those two are not in conflict with one another. Help us today, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Graham. Now, I've got a confession to make. Until I got a telephone call at about 11:30 this morning from Ben, I didn't know that I was supposed to be organising and hosting this session. So that leads us on very nicely to our first thought as a little icebreaker. And the question is, when have you had to either blag a situation, or when have you dropped the ball and let other people down? Okay, so I'll give you a choice of those sort of things. So blagging a situation or completely dropping the ball with something. Who wants to go first? Is that a volunteer again, Graham?
I am volunteering this time, genuine volunteering. A few years ago, a friend invited me to speak at their church weekend away. I'd never been asked to do something like that. It was a really lovely opportunity. I was a student, I had a free weekend. I was like, that'd be really lovely too. And so I was trying to put stuff together. I am a bit of a last minute person at times, and some people are like, sometimes, all the time. I was struggling slightly to kind of just pull together something that I thought would be really good for these young people. Anyway, so we were looking at something. One of the things we did was an overview of the Bible. One of the things I did as part of my session was an overview of the Bible, just to kind of just try and give a little snippet, a little bit of context for each of the books in that compendium. And there came a point during my talk when I was like, right, I've been speaking for a little bit of time. Let's go have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back for the last few books of the New Testament. And so the young people went off to get drinks and stuff. And the person leading the week came and, Graham, is this because you've not finished writing the end of your talk yet? And I went, yes, but that's okay, because in the next 15 minutes I can finish what I had. So we had a coffee break so I could write the end of the talk.
Nice. That's a
I would
great
not
flag.
advocate that as good practice.
Great flag.
Yeah, well, thank you, Graham. Yeah.
Love it.
Dawn or Ben, have you got an example?
I don't do it as much these days, but I used to lead quite a lot of sung worship. And as a student, I was invited to go and lead with a student band, or like the group from our Christian Union, to go and lead worship at the launch for South Lakes Youth for Christ. And that was really exciting because we'd been involved in kind of a lot of the prep for it and stuff like that. So I was like, great, we turned up. And the chaplain, who was at the university, was really involved as well. And he'd said, oh, can we sing this song? And I was like, yeah, of course we can. And of course, I found a really modern version of it. It turns out that he wanted, and he was looking for a very different version. Because basically I was leading like a whole bunch of early 2000s songs and sort of late 90s, early 2000s songs. And basically most of the people there wouldn't have known them. And I just picked another one thinking, oh yeah, of course this is the song he meant. So then when he comes up and he basically gives me that, I go, this, like, we're going to do this. And he goes, yeah, that's not the one I meant. So I'm like, oh, this is fun. So he literally sits there and kind of finds, this is the days before Google, and he finds out of a music book that he's got there, the music for it. And I have to try and blag my way through it. I think in the end, actually, so the totally like blagging through the practice with most of the musicians looking over my shoulder at this one copy we had. In the end, he went, do you know what, I'll do it. I'll sing it. So we were like blagging right up to the end. He's like, literally, we're practicing it. He's like, that isn't how that sounds. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll give you it.
Which is now.
There you go, you do that. But it was a fun little blag for a little while, and it wasn't quite as. I have to confess, blagging on that scale is like one of my worst nightmares. Genuinely, like I have dreams of turning up to stuff without a guitar or without my computer or without anything. So I may not be. I'm a bit like Graham, last minute, but I am always planned. It's like my lowest nightmare to not be. So, yeah.
Dawn, what about you? Surely you've never been in that situation.
Wow. I am super highly organized and efficient, so I really am. I'm a solo parent with 3 kids, so I extra have to be. But a few years ago, I dropped a major ball, which I'll be very honest about. It's one of those times when you feel desperately guilty. So I remember I was working several jobs, and it was one of those, when you get a really busy week and you don't know when you're ever going to stop and you're never going to sit down and you're working, it's ridiculous. And I remember I just finished one of my sessions at a different school, and I got outside my children's school, and early, and I was like, yes, I'm going to sit and have a nap for 10 minutes before I have to pick them up. And I'm going, there's a lot of parents' cars here early, or why are they here already? Anyway, I proceeded to close my eyes and have a little nap, only to wake myself up 5 minutes later in a panic that all the parents' cars were there because it was sports day, and I missed most of my child's sports day.
When you're asleep.
And he didn't even notice I wasn't there.
That's the best kind of dropping the ball, is when someone doesn't notice you're there. So that's always good. But...
I held that guilt for years.
And now you've confessed it live on the internet.
No.
How do you feel about that?
Well, there's freedom in truth.
When I first started this job about 4 years ago, I got invited to speak at a youth event. It was a local church, and they got together quite a few other churches, and we did this once a month. And I was the speaker as a new person in post. And I'd done all my prep, and I'd written a nice little cards with some little notes on it, and got there, and then was invited up to the front to speak at the right time. And I suddenly realized it was a youth event. They don't do lights in a youth event. It was completely dark from where I was sitting, standing at the front, and I couldn't make out a single word on any of my notes. I don't think that would faze me at the moment now. I just sort of go for it, but I just panicked at the time, and then I just sort of spoke roughly from what I could remember I prepared beforehand. But they haven't invited me back again, so maybe that's...
So you didn't just turn around and go, I feel like God is telling us just to wait.
Turn the lights on.
Just turn it. God says, light
Let there
shines
be
in
light.
darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. Lights on. Or in fact,
Yeah,
just
I
gone,
should have done that.
you could have just gone super kind of, yeah, we're going kind of Quaker-esque and just gone, we're just going to close our eyes and sit and wait on
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And they'd have all just sat there for 20 minutes while you went, it's good. And then
Yeah,
they went, amazing. We're going to
I
have a
didn't
time
know
of
you could do that
testimony
when I
now.
started though. Anyway, so let's have a conversation this afternoon. So the question we've been thinking about is, when is it not okay to talk about your faith? Are there certain times when it's often very difficult to talk about your faith? Are there any times when actually you shouldn't be talking about your faith? Would anybody like to kick off on that one?
There's probably obvious places, mainly because our guest last time highlighted a specific one. There are obviously definitely places in the world and times in life where you shouldn't probably talk, let alone talk about faith. But I think generally those kind of places are obvious. But there are obviously places where at times you think this isn't the right time or space, even in a kind of sensible place, and it's safeguarding, friendly, and all that. And I think sometimes I think you've got, there's definitely spaces where you think, like, I definitely have an opportunity to share my faith or to speak about Jesus in this opportunity. But I think there's definitely spaces where, and places where you think now isn't the time. And I think that helps frame it, because I think the reality is we'd all love to go, no, you talk about Jesus all the time. But I think there is there's definitely you've got to be in a place and probably in relationship enough with the young people that you can, that you're kind of allowed that freedom and the opportunity to speak about faith and to share faith and to ask questions of them about faith. I think it would be my starter for 10 on that.
Yeah.
I think some people can sometimes be so nervous about sharing their own faith. It is definitely one of the best places to do it is when you are in relationship with people, when you've got that relationship. But there's also the kind of the dropping the G-bomb, where you can actually talk to, I'm going to call it the G-bomb, Graham, I'm going to call it the G-bomb, where you can literally just be in a queue and just talk to someone about your faith in a very natural way, not kind of a waving a placard and the end is nigh kind of thing, but in a real natural way. So, for example, I used to spend a lot of time in supermarkets as one of my jobs, and I would have a beautiful relationship with the cashiers. Random, I know, but they knew what I did, and we were able to talk about God in a really natural way. And I think sometimes that is a barrier for people of, oh my goodness, I don't have the right words to say, how do I say them? And it can be a bit nerve-wracking as well sometimes, definitely.
Yeah. What was your job, if you're allowed to say? Because at the moment all I'm thinking is shoplifter.
I headed up all the catering in one of the churches I worked in, so it was quite good.
Mm-hmm.
Not the job wasn't good, but oh no, it was, if you're watching, it was amazing. But it was good in the sense that you were able to mix with people outside of a church circle. I think sometimes when you're in that church environment continually, we sometimes look at people who have normal jobs and go, well, why aren't you sharing your faith? What, I don't understand why you're not doing it. And it's great to be able to have a foot in both worlds, in the church world and the secular world, and just to be able to have those natural conversations, definitely.
I think there's also something of actually in some ways it's almost easier to share your faith in a natural conversation, bearing in mind that we all live in the north. And growing up in the south, that isn't always necessarily something that happens, is natural conversations in public. But I think there is something of actually with strangers, sometimes just a natural rapport happens, and they'll ask you what you're doing, and you're like, well, I'm doing this and that. And I have those conversations regularly. But I think there's something of when we consider kind of sharing our faith with young people, I think there's definitely something of going, like, actually there are times where you naturally have that conversation, but I think naturally it doesn't necessarily happen within kind of, sometimes some young people take to you really quickly as a leader, and they look to you and they'll ask questions, but I think there is definitely a space of that's a grower, and it takes a bit of time with young people to be in that space. So yeah, and so I totally agree, but I do think there's sometimes that naturally it's easier with strangers, almost, not in like as Dawn says, not in a like the end is nigh kind of way, but that actually says like, you know, I love some of the stuff that Pays do, which is like, because you're loved, they'll go out and stand and give out hot chocolate or lollies and stuff like that, and just go, you're loved, and people ask more questions, and sometimes that's easier than it is to sit alongside a young person who's basically gone like caused chaos. Though let's be honest, long term, the young people that cause chaos in youth groups are normally the ones that actually have the deepest faith. In my experience, the ones that you kind of want to wring the neck of for most of the time they're there, and at the end they're like, yeah, Jesus is amazing. Yeah, and they end up going, you're like, what just happened? And I say that in a very loving way. I've never wrung the neck of a young person, for all the safeguarding professionals out there. But I think it's sometimes it's harder if the relationship's not there, or it just feels like you're trying to force it. Yeah. And I think if you try and force something, as we know with most things, actually it doesn't end well. Yeah, I think there's, yeah, we were chatting a little bit before, and I was chatting to some other people this morning. We were talking generally about kind of sharing your faith, and I said, like, the last thing you want to do is go, hey, we plant seeds, but just take a bag of seeds and just chuck it at some earth, because that doesn't happen. Like this, like actually there's something of like sowing the right seeds at the right time in the right space, and kind of saying, actually, let's take this, like, let's do this. You can't just chuck a pack of seeds and expect it to grow. Like, there's definitely, you've got to unpack that, and you've got to be in the place to be able to sow those seeds. And so, yeah, I think that's quite important.
I think it's also about how you share your faith in what different contexts. I mean, for instance, in a school, I used to be a secondary school teacher in a community school for quite a long time. And you couldn't just sort of stand in front of a classroom and talk about your faith. I mean, you have a captive audience there. That wouldn't be a good or right thing to do. But there's, even in a classroom situation, there are times and ways to share faith. I was an RE teacher, and actually shared my faith far more in the classroom than any other context I've ever been in, because people always wanted to ask you questions. And so it was always fine to talk about my faith, but actually from my own point of view, they would say, well, what do you think about this? And just get the opportunity to talk about it. So I think be careful about where you are and how you share your faith. But even in contexts like schools, it is possible to share faith with staff, with pupils, in certain ways.
Yeah.
There are power dynamics to be aware of as well. Yeah, I think, you know, for us as a Christian youth worker, kind of faith is really important. That's you know, whether you're kind of a Christian youth worker in a Christian context, and so you're very much kind of Christian youth worker label, or you are a Christian youth worker in the sense of you're a youth worker who's a Christian, you're working in a secular context. But I mean, so there are subtleties there in terms of some of those dynamics. But certainly, if you are kind of badged as Christian youth worker, then like there's kind of very much that sort of expectation. This is part of what you're about, like, and that's, you know, kind of what it says on the tin. But at the same time, you're also a youth worker, so it's important to be mindful of the power dynamics in your conversations with young people, because you have the privilege of being in a position of influence and a position of authority, but therefore you also need to be aware that if a young person's having a really rubbish time and they come to have a conversation with you about that, then it's not like, well, let's not talk about faith. That would be really daft, because actually this stuff really matters. We really care about it, and we totally believe that God is relevant, like not just kind of on a Sunday morning in a church, but God is relevant in all situations, in all circumstances. God doesn't just want a Sunday morning bit of your life, he wants your whole life. So in that place, in one sense, it's actually natural to talk about God and how he kind of cares about a young person who's hurting, and speaking into a situation. That's really, really important. But at the same time, we also need to be aware of our responsibilities to a young person who's in a particularly vulnerable place, that we don't then abuse that position of trust to, you know, whether to kind of clumsily shoehorn faith stuff in, you know, like we're clumsy beings, and if you end up trying something like in a good spirit and it doesn't quite work out, then like, you know, hopefully things aren't too disastrous. But we also need to make sure that we're not acting in a coercive way, because that's not cool. And like bluntly, like, you know, that's really not okay. And it's really important that we present the gospel in a way that people make their own choices, that no one's kind of forced to believe anything, you know, or kind of seduced into believing it, but kind of going, actually, like, this is something that's a gift from God. It's not ours, this message, and it is something there for everybody, but it's also kind of for them to choose in their time, rather than, you know, according to our whims or our needing to bump up conversion stats. I don't know, like, you know, yeah. So I'd probably explain that not too well, but just we need to be aware of our own power in situations with young people, just to make sure that we're not abusing that dynamic. Like, in that place, you're probably being an excellent witness, and like naming God in that is definitely not bad at all, but just, yeah, to be careful.
There's means and ways you can do it though, isn't there? So like I was before I came into this role, I've done voluntary youth work for years, but I was employed as a school chaplain for 8 years, and one of the things is when you meet with that situation is you meet with young people, and naturally they haven't got a faith, but what you can do is offer to pray for them, and that gives them a choice, is to say, like, actually, it's not about like, how do I share my faith, how in 3 minutes am I going to shoehorn in like the whole entire gospel and give you an opportunity to respond, because that's going to change your situation. It's going to go, and actually, do you know what, I believe God wants good things for you. Can I pray for you? Can I pray for you now? Do you mind if I pray for you afterwards? And I guess the follow-up with that is going, actually, in a few days' time, you ask them, go, hey, I've been praying for you, how's this situation? And actually that example is faith to them. It's your faith in action that you're praying for them. But equally, it's saying, actually, God, it gives them an encounter of faith, because actually, if their situations change, they go, okay, tell me, it potentially creates an opportunity for them to go, all right, tell me a little bit more. Why does God care? Why does this? And you can go, okay, let's start from a different place. I'm not going to talk, like, I'm not got to do this. I've got to go, okay, God loves you. He's like, you're of great value. You're amazing. And I think that's one of the things I've found, is that actually, like, when it comes to sharing faith, you can be as subtle as anything. But actually, prayer is such a lovely way to get in, because most people will say, yeah, actually, I'd love you to pray for me, because if it turns out there is a God up there, I'd love him on my side. And that sounds really weird, but that also allows you a chance to continue the conversation and ask it, because they've trusted you with it to pray. And that's not coercive. That's not trying to have a power dynamic. That's trying to say, all right, I don't need to necessarily shoehorn Jesus into this, but what I can do is pray for you. And I want to do that. And I think that's sometimes one of the most powerful things we can do. In fact, it's one of the things when we talk to, I talk to youth groups that kind of go, hey, would you drop him? But how do we move it to, like, talking about faith? I'm like, prayer is a great kind of way to start, just letting them encounter God within the midst of that, which equally lives out your faith in front of them, because it says, well, I believe in a God who changes things and changes our circumstances and interacts with our lives and is transformational and transforms things. So, like, what's that engagement with it? And I think that's so, yeah, I think sometimes we think sharing faith, I've got to talk at you. Actually, it's that kind of presence, and equally, like, living out my faith alongside you is completely different. And I think that's so yeah, I totally back up what Graham's saying. I think there are ways in which we can do that really naturally, without feeling like we're being powerful or coercive, and actually not even feeling it, but actually not being coercive and not using power in that place. Because let's be honest, the church has got a history of it, sadly. And actually, what we want to do is for young people to have a natural encounter of faith, of Jesus. So anything we can do to kind of not use power is actually even better. So
I think one of the things that for young people, it's often young people themselves who are the best people at sharing faith with their contemporaries. So should we just think for a moment about what sort of things make it difficult for young people to share their faith, and then think about any sort of advice or tips for people working with young people, how we can help them to overcome some of those issues and to share their faith in the most effective way. So let's start about, what is it, do you think? I mean, it's the same for all of us. I think we all find it hard to share faith. But why do young people as well find it hard to share faith?
Well, I can start if that's okay. So I have 3 children. I'm starting anyway. I've got 3 children. One's almost 17, one's 14, and one's 12. And they all vary with how they share their faith story. So the one who's almost 17 is very vocal. He doesn't care. He never really has, about peer pressure, what people think about him. He has had visible miracles in his life. He was permanently deaf in one of his ears, and in a prayer meeting, God healed him. He gave me his hearing aid and went, "I don't need this anymore." I'm like, "Of course you do, don't be silly, put it back in." And he was like, "No, God has healed me." And I think it was the visible, seeing the miraculous in his life that really propelled him forward, and was just kind of like, "Wow, do you know what? God is real. He's not just this person that I've heard about for the whole of my life. I can physically see him working through me." So that's really kind of excelled his faith, to the point where we work in the area that we live. He wants to run an outreach football group specifically for evangelism. Not so, but it's kind of like, it's not like soft evangelism, we would say, which is great. Peer-to-peer evangelism is fab. My middle child is a little bit shyer. Is kind of like in the geek squad at school. He wouldn't mind me saying that because it's a cool geek squad, so it's fine. But he actually is at the point now where he's thinking, I think I need to start being a bit stronger in what I believe. And it gets to that point, doesn't it, when you start realizing who you are, who am I, what am I made for, and who is this God in my life? And it's at that point when you really start owning your own story. And I think that's where a lot of us stumble, is we don't have the words, we can't articulate. And it's until you get to that point as a young person where you either are physically seeing God move in your life, or you're able to kind of step away from that peer group pressure and go, no, this is where I'm standing now. I'm standing next to God, and you're either with me or I'm still your friend. It's that kind of living out in faith and action, isn't it, as well as words. My daughter is not as vocal yet. She wouldn't, if people would ask her, what have you done this weekend? She wouldn't necessarily go, I've been to church, but she wouldn't shy away from it. So she's not quite in that place yet. There's my little aspect of peer-to-peer.
Thank you.
I think there's two thoughts that I have on this, and one's probably slightly controversial, but it's actually that we potentially, one of the things that hold young people back is they don't see adults doing it.
Yeah.
And so that example, there's still something probably within the adult church, which I hate that term, but like the church as a whole, we go, that's a job of people that are called to it.
Can I just chip in on that as well?
Sure.
Just to kind of augment that as well with seeing adults not doing it, but also seeing adults talking about it and not doing it.
Yeah.
Sorry if that's where you were going. I just wanted to add that into the mix.
I love that. That's a great add in that. Actually, yeah, we so often go, hey, we do this, and if some of it comes back to that Christian bubble, doesn't it? Like we can get in a Christian bubble, and therefore we're not actually got contact with people that we talk about, that Dawn mentioned right at the start. We can get kind of really trapped in. But I think so. One of the things so therefore that living out the Great Commission just sort of feels like it's talked about, but not necessarily happens. I think what that also means, and it's probably evident, that adults aren't often confident in sharing their faith, or kind of when the conversation comes up is within that. And I think what ends up happening with that is that therefore, interestingly, therefore we don't create opportunities for young people to, almost like, it sounds also awkward, but it's kind of like we don't like create those synthetic opportunities, which are like, hey, we're going to go out and very deliberately do this. So I mentioned Pays right at the beginning. Like, there's something about deliberately going, I'm going to go out and do mission. We're going to go out and be witnesses. We're going to go out and be evangelistic. All those terms that we use is like, actually, have we created those opportunities? And some of the things I think holds young people back is the fact that adults don't go, hey, how do we're going to go out with you and do this, create the opportunity. And I think one of the things I've seen through, I have the lovely advantage that the Pays kind of UK base is in Burnley. And we've done some link up stuff with them, and we've been out on mission with them. And what's exciting is when you go out and take young people out, they start to realize, when you ask them to articulate what they believe, they start to realize what they believe.
Yeah.
And for some, that's a real eye opener as to, oh, gulp, like I'm maybe not where I thought I was. But for others, it's actually like, wow, yeah, this is real, and I'm going to share this, and this is really and I think that's really exciting. So I guess that some of the stumbling blocks are adults maybe not doing it, maybe talking about it but not doing it, aren't confident, but therefore don't create the opportunities, and push their own comfort zone, which creates opportunities for young people. And I think that's all of it. That's some of the stumbling blocks, I think, for not that's maybe where we. Yeah, that is what we're talking about. So I'm still answering the question. It's fine. That panic moment in my head. So I think that's a huge aspect of it.
Yeah.
So, and I think, it's the church not necessarily stepping up to do it, which is interesting. Probably a bit sad.
I was going to say, I had sort of two things that came to mind. One was Christians as being something that make it really hard for people to talk about their faith. Because when you have Christianity in a high-profile context, whether that's kind of in the news or in media, kind of sort of nationally, internationally, or locally, so things like, high-profile Christian figures, and then young people going, I don't associate with that individual, and everyone goes, oh look, there's that person, and they're a Christian, but I really don't associate with that individual, and so therefore being willing to have an association with them by having the same faith is really tricky. And there are loads of kind of different ways in which that can happen, and sort of different political flavors, or sort of people with a certain style of being, and that also kind of for when which Christians mess stuff up, and you look at the IICSA stuff. Kind of looking at where the church has had safeguarding failures, and like that. I was going to say that doesn't make the church look good, but that's because the church did bad. And so kind of people go, well, like, do I want to be like kind of part of that, because that looks really crummy. And in a sense that ties in with kind of like, what are the adults modelling in your setting? What are we modelling? And then also, I think culture can make it hard as well, not just in terms of things like peer pressure, but also the practice of talking about stuff. Ben said about kind of like that stereotype of people being more willing to chat to each other in the north. I was in a park in Bolton on Friday morning and had more conversations with people than I've had in the last 2 months. They weren't long, they were distance, don't panic. But so the practice of kind of talking to strangers and talking about what we are. In one sense, there's kind of that sort of classic thing of like, well, we're not going to talk about politics or religion at the dinner table. And there is something about that, but also I think actually if we as a society become sort of more sort of private, then actually that takes away loads of potential for conversation and discussion. And there are, thankfully there are groups all around this country working hard for, community work and other stuff, whether on a faith basis or a secular basis, but trying to encourage people to have those conversations. And I think it's really helpful when you're part of a place where it's okay to talk about who you are and what you're interested in. And that means you get to learn about other people's journeys, and you means you get to share something about some of yours. And so as a Christian, I kind of go, well, that's great, because that's a great opportunity to make it easier to talk about my faith, and maybe kind of other people then I can sort of share with them on that basis. But I also see it as leading to a better society, kind of on kingdom values in a sense, that it's a place kind of where people are willing to give each other time and listen and respect each other as well. So I think that kind of works well on a couple of levels if you're in a more open discussive context. But actually, if you're somewhere where people don't want to talk about it, then that makes it really hard to talk, because then you're the weird person for talking about it because nobody else does. You know, sort of speaker's corner soapbox stuff. Like, if you've never seen anyone doing that, then if you're the person doing that, that's really strange. And you read the New Testament in kind of, you know, like Paul standing up and kind of declaring stuff in the forum, whatever, and that sort of setting seems really alien, because we live in a culture where that isn't a practice, but trying to find those settings. And so equally, when there are kind of high profile people who are willing to talk about their faith, that can be an encouragement to go, this isn't so weird. And where that's diverse as well, you know, I guess, you know, when you see the person up front who's somebody you associate with, then that's easier, in the same way that when there's someone you don't, it's harder.
There's quite powerful about story though, isn't there, within all of this, in your own, like, we call it testimony, we might call it story. Like, I think we often think people say testimony was like, that's how I came to know Jesus. Like, that's fine. It's like, what's our story and our testimony of living life with Jesus? And I think one thing I've noticed, and I've seen it, is that, like, there's something about truth. This is a slightly different side to it, but it is, I think it's totally relevant, is that, like, we have a couple of generations now, millennials being one of them, Gen Z being the other, that go, that's great, that's your truth and it's good for you. But what ends up happening is that actually, and that's if you share, like, if you were like really overt, this is what I believe, they'll go, oh, that's great, I love that you're passionate about that, that's so good for you. It's not for me, but that's truth for you, and I love that. You can tell I've had those conversations, can't you? Did that really well. But what ends up happening is going, actually, your experience of God showing up in your life and being part of life, and you're living out your faith, is something people don't dispute. They actually kind of like that, because it relates to this, lives out through this way. And I think there's sounds slightly different, but it's hugely different in that, actually, for Gen Z particularly, like, story is huge, authenticity is massive. So actually, your faith lived out authentically, and part of that is I balls up, some of that is I make mistakes, some of that is not having a good day, but God's in the midst of it. And I think that's, therefore, it's those spaces, isn't it? It's where it, rather than trying to go, hey, I've got to fit the gospel into 4 minutes for you, and avoid those soapbox moments, is those conversation spaces, is like, you know, this is me being kind of honest about my life, but actually, do you know what, like, this is how God relates to that. And I think that's, sometimes it's one of those things that actually just is there, and we can use that story, that young people will sit back and go, oh, okay, like, that's your life, and I hear what you're saying, I wonder what this looks like for me. So yeah, different way, it's just different things, isn't it? I guess tools at our disposal, but some of it's about, actually, it's not about tools, it's about being authentic with people and living your life alongside them. And stories, our life story and who we are, lives alongside that, doesn't it, really clearly? So
thanks, Ben, that's really helpful. I think fear, at a basic level, it's often fear that holds people back. I mean, adults as well as young people. I mean, it's a fear of messing up, actually sort of not getting your words right, the fear of actually not knowing things, to have somebody ask you questions about it that you can't answer. And also, I think perhaps the biggest thing is the fear of rejection. Fear of actually somebody sort of saying, well, they don't want to know you if that's what you believe. They don't want to be your friend any longer. And so that's massive for young people who want to desperately fit in and not be seen as an outsider, as somebody who doesn't belong. And so it's really challenging to, and I like what Ben was saying about sharing story. I think that is a much easier way to go into it, rather than actually trying to proclaim the gospel to friends and to peers. I like the saying that courage isn't the absence of fear. That if you're courageous, it doesn't mean that you're not afraid, but it actually means you do it in face of fear. So Ben's mentioned about story. Has anybody else got any sort of helps or hints or tips that could actually encourage young people to share their faith more easily or better?
I'll go. I know Graham's got something as well.
Because Graham always has something.
Always has something. Always. Very organised. It's
Always
Graham.
good.
Very organised. No, I think this this season, this pandemic, has really shown us that we are missing relationship. That people miss relationship, and that connection and those easy conversations that we can have. I love that conversation that you had, Graham, about being in the park and having just natural conversations with people. And I think this time, for us being able to share our story authentically is I mean, what a point in history we're in. It's amazing. Next year, the Church of England always have a Lent kind of devotional period, and next year is all about living his story. So it's finding ways to authentically and naturally and easily tell our own story to our peers, to our family, to our friends, and to strangers, which is brilliant. So living his story, so you can order that through the Church of England stuff. That's a brilliant place. I've just seen Graham waving his book. I'll pass you on to Graham. His book.
Actually, that was the shadow was a piece of paper. I was going to hold up like breaking news, like Dawn promotes like Church of England stuff for next Lent. Whoa. Well, I mean, if now's the appropriate time to mention it actually follows on really nicely from the conversation about story, and also it always picks up kind of about Ali in the comments talking about sort of confidence in teaching and stuff. So this is a book by Phil Knox, Story Bearer: How to Share Your Faith with Your Friends. And so Phil, someone I know from, he used to work for Youth for Christ, now works for the Evangelical Alliance. And so it helps you think about being a story bearer, holding the story, how powerful sharing that can be, and about us having confidence in God's story and in our story. So it's available from Eden and other booksellers. Like I had a quick gander. It's about a tenner. You might be able to get it cheaper elsewhere. One place you can get it cheaper is here at Youthwork Conversations Live. Because if you would like, I have one copy of this to give away because I'm too stingy and didn't buy more. But I have it's on red. They're the copy I have to give away. I've got another copy red. I'm explaining this so bad.
You can hear Graham's etchings, and if you want a book that's already been read and marked out, you want to know the inner workings of someone else's brain.
Slightly dog-eared. It's got a cup of tea spilt on it. No. So if you would like a brand new copy of Phil Knox's Story Bearer, that hasn't been stained by tea, then if you comment in this, if you've already commented, you're on to a winner. So if you leave a comment over the course of this week, then we will pick somebody as randomly as I can work out how to do randomness. I feel like my GCSE mathematics teacher would be like getting annoyed, but as randomly as I can, we'll pick somebody, and if you're willing to give us your address, we'll post it out to you, and if you're not, then we'll just take a series of pictures and send them to you on Facebook Messenger. No, so leave a comment and we'll send a copy out to you for free. I've done this plug really badly now, but anyway, so if you want a free copy of Story Bearer, leave a comment this week.
Nice.
Is it signed by your mate Phil?
Oh, it's not, but to be honest, if you want a signed copy, I could probably sort that out for you. So maybe we should have two. Maybe the person that comes in first place will sort you out with a signed copy, and second place you can have this copy. Gosh, there's a mission for me for this week. Thanks, Andy.
Can I just mention two more places as well, if that's okay? So I was talking about football earlier on. So there's a place, I'll put it in the chat later, called Ambassadors Football, that specifically looks at using football for mission in your area, which is brilliant. And also the Archbishop's College of Evangelists, their mission is to recruit 1,000 new evangelists over the next however many years, specifically focusing on a number of young people. But they have it's a great website, some great tools for evangelism and sharing your story on there as well. I'll pop those in the chat as well.
A couple of things came to mind. I think, I guess a resource that's for youth groups, but is actually aimed at how do we build that relational space to be able to share faith is a Scripture Unions Rooted resource. It's not a program. They're very strong about that. But actually is kind of actually how it's almost a model for how do we do relational youth work? How do we get alongside young people? How do we have those conversations of faith from a really natural perspective? So that's one thing. I think there's two other things that kind of link together, but and some people are going to go, oh no, potentially. But Mission Academy Live, which is a resource that you can do. It's very much like Alpha in the sense that it's video based and it can all be delivered by your group. You can do it online, you can do it in person. And that's about equipping your young people to be able to share their faith. Now, it's maybe a little bit more overt rather than kind of how you live alongside people, but it's about growing confidence about faith, sharing your faith. The other one is Amplify, which is part of Advanced 2020. And they've got a new cohort starting in January. They've said all of that training is going to be online. Essentially, this is for young people that we say, actually, you know, they have got a real distinct gift about sharing their faith. And we want to equip them better and gather them together to be encouraged and stuff like that. So there's loads of people that have kind of partnering in doing that. I know that Hope are involved, the Church of England are involved, Youth for Christ, Pays. If you go to the website, like there's loads of people, Festive. I could just keep coming up with them, but basically there are loads of people. The people, don't be offended if I've forgotten you. Like, you're part of that. It's all good. And I think that's really, I think there's some really easy things that we can get involved in, particularly if we've got a real heart to see this happen. And I guess the Mission Academy Live stuff, the advantage is you do it as a youth leader alongside your young people. So actually, if you're thinking, how do I do this? Hey, let's do this together. Maybe a really unthreatening way to skill yourself up as well as do that. And without being symbolic, because Johnny Masters, who you'll have seen his face on here 1,000 times, he would kick me if I didn't say that on the 27th of February next year, there is the Youth Evangelism Conference, which is both going to take place in Manchester. It's also taking place in Cambridge, but it might be a long way, depending on where you live, both live, but also online. And bookings are open for that. There are some really distinctly different inputs within that, hopefully representing the majority of the church within it. So I just want to stick that out there. It's get yourselves on that. Even if it's like something that really like you're fearful of, like get along, go. It'll be encouraging. It will really, hopefully, be a really helpful day, a really good day. So.
And can I just quickly, Andy, sorry, it's a really quick point. I know we're running on minutes a little bit, but just to say, if you have listened to all of these plugs and you kind of go like evangelism, like evangelical, I don't know if those are kind of words I like or associate with. Just I was reminded this reflecting this weekend about something I'd seen and kind of how the term is defined. I just want to encourage you. So the root of the word evangelism, evangelical, the root of that is about sharing good news. The root of that word is about sharing good news. And so a little bit like, I suppose, some of the stuff we said earlier about connotations, if you're kind of going like, I don't know if I like those labels or whatever, then just, if it helps, break it down like this. Like, if you think the message of God, message of Jesus is good news, and you want that to be something that you share with people, then that's what it's about. It's not kind of about movements or badges or kind of sort of particular doctrines as such. Like if you love Jesus and you think he's great news for people and you want to share that, then these are some tools to help, and that's what it comes down to.
In John chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man, and the religious leaders question this man about his faith, and he says, all I know is that I was blind, but now I can see. And that is sort of a simplest testimony, really. Just what was our life like before? How is our faith? How has Jesus impacted our life? What change, what difference has he made? And nobody can argue when we talk about our faith in that context. Nobody can argue with our story, because that is something which is real, genuine, authentic, and that will often sort of give the opportunity to talk about the gospel and why and how Jesus died. I like to for three things just to finish off the conversation. One is praying for open doors. So praying for opportunities. So if you want to share your faith and find it difficult, which we all do, pray for an open door, opportunities to actually to be able to talk to people. Pray for an open mouth. So you're praying for what to say to people and for the courage to say it at the right time and not the wrong time. And the third time is to pray for an open heart. So pray for the person you're speaking to, that their heart will be open to what God might be doing in their life and saying to them at that time. Well, I think that brings us, unless anybody's got any other final thoughts or comments. Anybody else?
I just picked up Ali's just put something in the comments about and like part of this depends on the dynamic with young people and kind of if our youth work is about like where it's stuff done to them, for them or with them. That's just a really great reflection. So if you've not checked the comments, go have a read of that, because it's a really important thing about how we do youth work and actually how this then ties in with that.
Brilliant, thank you. Dawn, would you pray for us as we finish? I don't just mean us, I mean pray.
Lord, we thank you for this time together. Lord, we thank you for the freedom that we have to proclaim the good news. Lord, we ask for those three things, Lord, over this next week, for opportunities, for the right words, and Lord, for open hearts as well. Lord, we just ask your blessing on the week and everything that it brings, and the opportunities and the challenges and the joys. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So next week is another video reflection, I believe. And then in 2 weeks' time is back for another conversation. Is anybody able to remind us what that conversation is about in 2 weeks' time? Dawn?
Spiritual mentoring.
Oh, right. Fantastic. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
And
I must just finish with one final plug.
Before Christmas, just to say.
Oh yes, and there'll be a break. Yeah. This is really for if you are involved in schools or if you're involved in youth groups. A number of us have been putting together some videos for Advent that are going to be available hopefully by the end of this week, ready for the start of the 1st of December. And these can be used in school context. They can be used in youth groups. They are sort of about 3-minute videos, all on a Christmassy type of theme. But so if you, do we know where you can't access them yet? Can you? I'm looking around at my.
No, I think they're going to be on Manchester and Chester's YouTube pages, as far as I know, and then they'll be posted onto social media as well, and we'll probably put a link to them on this page as well. Yes,
so watch out for those coming up very, very soon. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you to our guests and fellow panelists. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been really good. So thank you guys, and that brings us to an end of our live conversation. So Ben, do you finish off, or do I just for our Zoom waves?
Zoom waves. Let's Zoom wave, and I'll just end the stream. That's good.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.